Hello and welcome. We are with Ipsita Dasgupta, the CMO of GE in India and South Asia. Ipsita, thank you so much for joining us. What can India do to make the work environment better for its women workforce?
So that's a great question. I think there's multiple layers at which you can answer that question. At the India layer, if you think about things like government, police, corporations, we can all do things to enable that further. There are not enough women in the manufacturing sector, mostly because there are plants in far-off locations. So we have to, as corporates, create the right kind of infrastructure for physical safety. Similarly, government needs to think about those things as well. At the individual level, just given the woman's commitment, biological commitment to her family, the fact that largely women still play a very large role in the private life of a home, society almost has to get together and make a pact to help make women more successful and be allowed to, or be enabled to make decisions that further their careers.
You know, a lot of Indian women particularly are willing to are not willing to let go of that.
I don't even think it's just an Indian woman phenomenon. I think women in general have somewhat because of a biological commitment we have to our children, somewhat because we are socially conditioned that way, don't necessarily always think through these choices, recognize what we actually want to do with our lives, and say, okay, that will mean giving more responsibility and trusting more other people. I think the other way to think about it is, as women, that as we become more senior as women, we actually owe it to other women to, one, demystify the world of public life and careers and what that actually means and how much of it involves making choices and trade-offs, and be better mentors and better leaders. There was a great quote that I heard the other day at a book launch where someone said, leaders don't create themselves, but they have to be found. Similarly, women leaders, women in more senior positions, have to be greater champions of other women. And not to leave out men, I think it is really important that we do the same thing. I think we can't discuss this and drive this agenda by ourselves. We need as many men as part of the pact. One of the most important choices a woman makes, for example, is the person that she chooses to marry, because that involves deciding multiple things about the partnership and the role that that person takes on. My sense is men want to do more, and we don't always have these discussions. The discussion we had today, the majority of the room were women. It would have been great to see half the people in the room be men.
Okay, so how important then do you think, is it for women to take on more leadership roles, in India?
Absolutely. Women taking on leadership roles is extremely important. And this is not just an India phenomenon again. Across the world, we see this to be an issue. And the fewer leaders we have, the less representative they are of the rest of the population. When 50% of the population is missing in the fabric of leadership in any sector or environment, you're not getting true representation. Diversity is a huge part of innovation and productivity. We are missing that whole part of diversity, and we need to have more people who are aware of the choices and the decisions and the types of paths or the roadblocks or enablers that come in the path for a woman to identify other women. Not to mention, many studies have been done that show women are actually some of the best employees, the better employees, because they tend to stay longer with companies. They tend to have certain levels of work ethic and perform at a rate in certain industries that are some of the strongest.
There's also a perception that there are certain types of work which women can do, and there are types of work which women can't. For instance, women do exceedingly well in the services sector, but they are very, very poorly represented in the manufacturing sector. Why do you think this kind of a gap exists?
Yeah, and unfortunately, I think that is actually the perfect example of where the issues are about actual roadblocks that exist. A typical girl who is deciding where to go to college and what to study will choose the services and software sector if she's choosing an engineering degree, because her parents, not because they don't think their daughter can be a manufacturing engineer, thinks, how do I send her to a remote plant location where 99% of her colleagues will be men and the safety issues and late night shifts and things become a real issue. So as companies, we really have to think about how do we make sure that that doesn't happen. Those hindrances are so much more significant. The IT and services industry, for example, brings in more women than men at entry-level positions. Equally quantitative, equally driven by degrees like engineering and finance and other degrees. Why do we see such a big shift? And really it's the logistics, it's the real stuff.
So how important then would you rate, like say, safety at work as far as barriers to women at workplaces are concerned?
I would say it's a huge factor. I mean, I think those are the kind of things we probably don't think about in big cities where we're surrounded by lots of people, or in cities like Mumbai especially, which is relatively safe. But I think about it when I actually speak to people who are trying to make career decisions, and I'm shocked by the number of people who say, I can't go into a manufacturing sector company, I can't go to a great engineering company because where are they going to place me? Parents worry about their children going into civil service programs because of where their daughters will be placed. These are real significant issues, and there are women in leadership positions, and all of us have a responsibility to actually drive some of those issues ourselves because we are more aware of them. We are more aware than a man is of how we feel when we're in a situation that doesn't feel safe. So it's somewhat our responsibility to educate and empower and create situations where the rest of the population recognizes it, and the rest of the leadership, though may be male, understands literally what it means.
So, there's also an issue about safety at the workplace itself.
Yeah.
How big a problem is that?
I don't know, but I think having the right policies and the regulations in place are absolutely fundamentally important. Educating on them is very important. Gender sensitivity across organizations is, equally important. Anytime safety is in question, there's an issue. Safety doesn't only exist in the workplace as an issue. Safety exists inside the home, across the world, in multiple homes as an issue. But the advantages of having strong regulations, rules, describing them, talking about them often, really start to drive a corporate culture that I think is extremely important. Companies across India today are known for being very good about this. There are brands that are known for being good about this, and there's a reason. They've taken certain steps.
Do you think that the private sector perhaps could incentivize women to actually join the workforce, or to increase that composition of the workforce, if I may put it that way?
Absolutely, and I think it is by understanding the needs, understanding the issues, understanding the roadblocks. Sometimes I've now been living in India for 5 years. I've done a lot of panels on women, and interestingly, sometimes I have young women come up to me and say, my issue is not my parents, and not my spouse, not my husband, but my in-laws. So what can we do to give people the experience? Usually, in my experience, when people don't know, they are more afraid of something. When they know what it means for their daughter-in-law or their spouse to be in the work environment, how empowered they are, what they bring back to the home, what they bring back to their grandchildren, I think very few people are likely to say no.
Okay, there's also a perception that women actually sort of are treated differently at their workplace compared to their male colleagues. Now, how prevalent is this?
I think that's a difficult question to answer. I think multiple people feel treated differently. People feel treated differently because they are a certain ethnicity or a certain religion or a certain community or multiple reasons. So I think it's hard to say. I think it's largely dependent on specific work environments, specific people. And I think also the recognition, I think there was a time when female leaders made other women feel or mentored women by saying, forget that you're a woman when you walk into the workplace. I think that has changed. I think now the conversation is different. There's no reason to forget that you're a woman. The importance is having the diversity in the workplace. So I wouldn't say there's anything wrong with anybody being treated differently. I hope every person is treated differently. I want diversity on my teams. The question is, are we saying someone is bad or good?
Okay. Finally, the one thing that India must do to ensure that, that its woman workforce really grows.
Mentor. mentor, demystify what it means to drive success, make responsible every woman who's a leader and every man who's a leader to figure out ways in which to drive the gender balance. Identify 3 goals, each and every one of these leaders. Identify 3 goals or 3 ways to make that happen on an annual basis. We can't forget that the discussion is important. We can't forget that the understanding of the situation is important, and the recognition that every generation will get to do it differently, understanding what that is and enabling.
Okay, Ipsita, thank you so much for joining us.